Hello friends, and once again welcome to this second video presentation. I hope some of you have spent at least some time on the previous video that I sent you. And today let us have a little clarity and get a little understanding of embedded journalism. I'm sure most of you would know already what embedded journalism is all about. What I'm trying to do today is only to give you a little more clarity and also maybe bring about what some journalists speak about embedded journalism itself, because it is nice to hear from journalists themselves what they are trying to say about embedded journalism. Now, as the word itself suggests, it is embedded journalism. Embedded. The word embed comes from, let's say, military concept. The dictionary meaning would be, the first dictionary meaning of embedded or embed would be fixing firmly and deeply in a surrounding mass. Fixing firmly and deeply in a surrounding mass. So that is the first meaning, dictionary meaning of embed. And the second meaning is what we are concerned about, that is attaching to a military rule. Attaching to a military rule. So that's the second understanding of embed. So in other words, embedded journalism would be journalists going with a military unit to begin with. In other words, they go along with the military, they live with the military, and then they do war reporting. So embedded journalism, of course, is something to do with war. It has something to do with war journalism, but it is not the typical war journalism an independent journalist would do. Here, this journalist goes with the military and he does journalism about the war or war reporting from the point of view of the military that he is going with. And if we have to consider a little bit on the history of this embedded journalism, when did it all begin? Of course, most of the things begin in America. Many of the, including, let's say, any journalistic innovations begin in America, as all of us know. And embedded journalism also began with the American journalists. In fact, it began in the 80s and 90s, this embedded journalism, when there was this Persian Gulf War between Iran and Iraq. You would know this war went on for about 10 years in the 80s and till about 1980 to 90, almost 10 years this war went on. And during this war, there were a few journalists who accompanied American military. As you know, America sided with Iraq, and that's why American military was there in the Gulf region. And some journalists were taken with the military. Limited journalists were taken with the military. So this embedded journalism began there during the Persian Gulf War. But then later, a full-fledged unit of journalists was taken to the Gulf region once again in 2003-4, when America attacked Iraq. As you would know, when America attacked Iraq in 2003-4, during that time, nearly 600 journalists, American journalists, were taken by the military for this war reporting. Now, we cannot blame, or let's say, cannot say that it was the military or the government which is responsible for the rise of embedded journalism. It was the journalists themselves, the reporters themselves, who requested the government to take them along with the military to do the war reporting. Because as you would know, war reporting is not easy at all. It is really a tough job, and many reporters, journalists have lost their lives doing war reporting all over the world. Hundreds of them have lost their lives. It was becoming too risky to do war reporting. Of course, you have to do war reporting, and then you have to be safe also. So these things were not easy, and that's why here were journalists who requested the government and the military to take them along, and that's how the whole concept of embedded journalism started. So it was the journalists who requested to begin with. And then, of course, even the American Department of Defense also felt the benefit of this, felt the benefit of taking the journalists to the war zone, mainly because they knew that the journalists would be with them and they would do the reporting from their perspective, and that would add a lot of credence to their military activities in the war region. Now, there are of course some rules with regard to embedded journalism. It is not like a journalist can do whatever they want when they go with the military. There are certain rules. What are some of the rules that they have to follow? First of all, they have to be always with the military unit. They have to be with the soldiers. They have to live with the soldiers. They may have to put up with a lot of inconveniences. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is when you do, let's say, photography and all that, there will be also photographers, not just reporters, but photojournalists also would be there. So these photojournalists should not use flash photography, especially during the night and all. They're not allowed to use flash photography at all. So that is the second rule. And then if you do not follow any of the rules and regulations that the soldiers tell you, you may be simply removed and sent back. So these are some of the rules that the soldiers have to follow when they go for war reporting through embedded journalism. Now, if you can understand, there are of course a lot of benefits of embedded journalism. Not that there are not benefits. In fact, lots of benefits are there. So what are some of the benefits of doing embedded journalism? First of all, as I already said, war journalism is very, very risky. A lot of journalists are killed. So such risks are considerably reduced when you do embedded journalism. When you go with the military, absolutely such risks are minimized. Not that there won't be at all risks, but they are considerably minimized. To give you a little statistics, a study says that between 2003 and 2009, especially when this Gulf War was happening in Iraq, when America attacked Iraq, during that time, only 7 embedded journalists were killed. Only 7 embedded journalists were killed. And still, of course, some journalists were killed, but their number was just 7. As against that, as many as 132 other journalists who were not embedded. 132 journalists were killed at the same period, 2003 to 2009. So, which means the risk to embedded journalists is considerably low as compared to non-embedded journalists. So, that's the first advantage. And secondly, also, of course, embedded journalists will get an easy access. I wouldn't say easy access, but a comfortable access to war zone. They can see the war from close quarters. So, this is another advantage. But what is the benefit of seeing the war from close quarters is that your report can be very authentic. Your report can be trustworthy because you are seeing the war from close quarters. So that is another advantage. This third advantage is, since you are living with the soldiers, you are living with the commanders and so on, you have also access to them, which means you can take their interviews. You see, because they may not be otherwise available at all to you and you may not be able to meet them, but here you are actually living with them, so you can take interviews with them, soldiers as well as commanders and others. So that access also, you have another great advantage. And then also sometimes you may also have access to warcraft. Warcraft is nothing but, let's say, helicopters and flights and so on. So you will be traveling in those flights and in those helicopters and so on. So you will have access to warcraft. So that is another advantage. So these are some of the advantages, but there are also some negative aspects about, when there are benefits, there are also some, I wouldn't say disadvantages, but then certain negative aspects of embedded journalism. So what are some of the negative aspects of embedded journalism? One is that there is a risk of inherent bias. There's a risk of inherent bias. Why risk of inherent bias is because you develop certain camaraderie with the soldiers, with the commanders and the military unit. So, since you are becoming very friendly with them, it is possible that you have bias for them, which means you may not report at all anything negative about them. You'll be only good to them in all you are reporting. So this bias is the risk of bias. Then also there is a possibility of developing Stockholm syndrome, as they say. You would know what is Stockholm syndrome. Stockholm syndrome is nothing but developing some affection to your captor, to your kidnapper. So somebody kidnaps you. Instead of let's say getting worried about him or getting afraid of him, you develop certain affection for him. So that is called as Stockholm syndrome. And these soldiers are, metaphorically at least, they are kind of taking you to the war zone, risky zone, as though kidnapping you, metaphorically. And you develop a lot of affection to them. You are no more frightened of them. So this is another risk in doing embedded journalism, negatively speaking. And another aspect also is it could be a propaganda tool. It can develop into a propaganda because you are with the military, you are with the government. So government may try to censor whatever you are reporting, possibly, and from that point of view, you may be reporting only non-controversial aspects which benefits the government, which benefits the military, and then it may turn out to be a propaganda. So this is another danger of war reporting, this embedded journalism. So you are getting only one-sided story from only military side or your government side story. You may not at all get the story from the other side. Why? Because you have absolutely no access to the other side. So then it becomes really a story. If it becomes nothing but a propaganda. So that danger also is there. Now let me give you a certain perspectives given by a couple of journalists on embedded journalism. One is, of course, David Ignatius. He did a lot of war reporting for Washington Post. So he agrees that war reporting is too dangerous. He agrees, especially for a Western reporter, a reporter from Western countries like America or Europe and so on. If they have to go to the war zones in Middle East or Afghanistan and many other war-affected countries, if these journalists have to go, they have to face a lot of risk because especially these people are very hostile to the Westerners, to the Europeans and Americans. So they have to face a lot of risks, and David Ignatius agrees to this fact. In fact, if you know, several important major reporters were abducted, especially you know the story of Daniel Pearl, who was abducted in Pakistan, and then he was killed, beheaded there. And then you have another reporter in the 80s, John McCarthy, who was abducted by the Lebanese insurgents there, and he was kept in hostage for nearly 5-6 years. So you have hundreds of cases like that where journalists have been kidnapped and killed. In Africa, if you see, so many journalists are many times kidnapped. In the Middle East and many other places, you have journalists putting their own lives into risk during the war reporting. And David Ignatius agrees that war reporting can be very, very dangerous. Yet he calls embedded journalism as unprofessional. He calls it unprofessional. Why does he call embedded journalism unprofessional? Is because it goes against the very ethics of journalism. Ethics of journalism. So what are some of the ethics of journalism? Is first of all, you have to be as much as possible objective. Isn't it? Objectivity is very much part of news values as well as ethics. Ethical journalism demands that you become objective. Secondly, independence. Independence is a strong point of any good ethical journalism. If you don't have independence, it is possible that you speak for somebody else. You are not speaking for yourself and your media, but you may be speaking for somebody else. So independence also is lost when you do embedded journalism. And thirdly, also, you are no more unbiased. You are supposed to be unbiased in terms of ethical journalism, but by doing embedded journalism, you are no more uh, unbiased. You are biased. Objectivity is lost because you get only one-sided story, as I said already. Since you are with the military and government, you do not get anything from the other side, so objectivity may be lost. Independence is lost because, once again, you cannot be independent. You have to go with the military, live with the military, and report what they tell you to report and not what you want to report. So independence is lost. Independence is lost. So that is another difficulty of embedded journalism, which David Ignatius agrees. And thirdly, also, bias is there. I have already discussed this also. Bias, you develop bias for the military and the government because you are always with them. They are taking care of you, and that's why that bias already comes. That was David Ignatius writing for Washington Post. He speaks about that. There is another journalist I want to refer here, Patrick Cockburn. He also has done a lot of war reporting for the newspaper in United Kingdom, the newspaper called The Independent. And speaking about embedded journalism, Patrick Cockburn would say it does lead to bias. It says it does lead to bias. Doing embedded journalism has its own bias. It kind of leads itself or lends itself for bias. But he also says that experienced journalists are smart enough to kind of tweak military propaganda. If you are experienced journalist, you can somehow get away with all the comfort and all the care that the military is giving you and still do some objective independent reporting. How you do it, it depends on each experienced journalist. A cub reporter, if he's sent, he may not be able to do it. If, let's say, an inexperienced journalist is sent, he or she may not be able to kind of tweak and do the type of reporting he or she wants to do. But an experienced journalist may be able to do is what our friend Patrick Cockburn, writing for The Independent, speaks about embedded journalism. Now, what about the experience in India? I only spoke about international experience in terms of embedded journalism. Is there embedded journalism in India? It is very much there. One example I could give you is during the Kargil War in 1999. You had the Kargil War happening in Kargil in Kashmir. During that time, you had a lot of reporters from India, of course. They went with the military and they stayed with the military and did the reporting. So we might say that they did good reporting. They kind of did everything objectively and brought us the real story, is what we may be saying. And it may be true also, and yet it was embedded journalism. So you had only story from one side, Indian side only you had story. I'm not saying that the story from the other side was not given at all, may have been given, and yet you had perspective from our point of view, Indian point of view, which may be the correct point of view. I'm yet saying, I'm not denying it all, it may be the correct point of view, and yet since it is embedded journalism, it is possible that you gave only report from our side, from the other side. And of course here the whole question of aspects of patriotism and nationalism and all that comes, these aspects come, and because of which also a lot of passions also are involved, and especially when it comes to Pakistan, we do not want to at all give any credence to whatever comes from there. Yes, at least that's how journalism unfortunately these days works. They are kind of overwhelmed by nationalism and such other principles rather than let's say ethical journalism. And that's anything about Pakistan can be very risky sometimes. Not risky, but you may be you may be let's say displeasing a lot of people, so you don't want to take that risk. And in the bargain, it is possible that journalism, ethical journalism, is kind of compromised. So during the Kargil War, you had a bit of an ethical journalism. During the Kargil War, of course, you had some kind of embedded journalism. But I would also like to refer to another type of an embedded journalism that happens these days. Is you may call it diplomatic journalism, but it is still some kind of embedded journalism itself. It is this: when let's say an important leader goes to another country, let's say our prime minister goes to a country in Europe, or he goes to America, he takes a battalion of reporters. A lot of reporters go in his aeroplane, and then they do a lot of reporting there. The diplomatic relations and whatever agreements that take place in that country, and what the prime minister is doing, where he's going, and so on and so forth. Or let's say even when let's say president goes, or important leaders and ministers go abroad, they do reporting. So isn't it embedded journalism? Some kind of embedded journalism happens there, because it is the government which is taking you to another country. So government is paying you, government is taking the entire risk with regard to your safety, security, and so on. So you would be reporting something that pleases the government and the leader. You may not be taking a very critical view. You don't want to displease the leaders and the government, so you are giving only one version, or let's say the positive version only you may give. You may not be very, very critical, even if it demands, the whole development demands a critical look. You may not do that because you are going with the leader. So this is also some kind of an embedded journalism. But do the reporters and let's say media avoid it? They may not be able to avoid it, because you also need to know what is happening there. So if you are in the close quarters of these leaders, you are able to do maybe some kind of reporting, and maybe better reporting. And yet there is a danger sometimes to lose your ethics by going with the leaders and reporting, being with the leader, being taken care by the leadership. And then of course sometimes you get these junkets. The government also sometimes gives junkets to journalists. Why does it give junkets to journalists? It is because to have a good feeling with the media, to kind of have it's not buying the media or something. I wouldn't call that by giving junkets. The government and other agencies are buying the media, but you create a good feeling with the media. So media will be very nice to you. Media will not be critical of you. Media will not let's write anything negative about you, because you are giving them a lot of junkets and freebies. So this is also another danger the journalists and the mass media have to face today when it comes to journalism. It becomes another kind of embedded journalism. So with that, I come to the end of this video, dear friends. And what we have discussed today is basically about embedded journalism. It has got both positives, strong points, and that let's say it gives you close access to the military zone and the war and so on. But it has got its own negatives, and one important negative is that it can compromise ethical journalism. With that, we end this video. Hope to see you in another video. Thank you very much.